All right. To get started, I'm going to share my screen and we'll get underway here. Okay, so those of you, thanks for joining us. And again, we are working on quoting with, writing with sources, quoting with paraphrasing, quoting and paraphrasing. So you get the daunting task to write a paper with outside sources. You think it might be impossible, but it's not. And with the help of the Academic Support Center, we are going to get you where you need to be when writing those papers with outside sources. So let's take a look how it's done. The first thing you'll need to do is to find your sources. You will need to find reputable sources that are appropriate for academic writing. So first stop, check your classroom, check textbooks, PDFs, anything that might be on Moodle. There's resources that your instructor might provide for you as well. Also, if you're going to surf the web, please make sure you do so responsibly. Use reputable sources such as .orgs, .govs, or .edus. That's what is going to be most helpful in your academic search. For further research, Phillips Library has a database, and we'll be putting a link in the chat so that you are able to look at what sources are available to you. So the question is, why do we use outside sources? Why do we need to bring in information other than what we know, other than what we want to discuss on our own? So it will give you relevance. It will demonstrate that what you're talking about is something that is relevant in today's conversation. It'll also offer support to your topic, and it'll give credibility. So you know what you're writing about is credible. So there's two different ways to do it. Two main ways. You can use direct quotes or paraphrasing. This is the ways that we incorporate research. So if you're going to do it direct, if you're going to pull information from your source, exactly from your source, you're going to be quoting. And if you're going to be doing it indirectly, you will be rephrasing and putting things into your own words by paraphrasing. So if you're writing with APA, it is best to do the paraphrasing. They strongly recommend paraphrasing when you're writing with research in your papers. So we know where to find the information. We know we have a couple ways to present the information. Let's look a little bit more on how to present that information. Let's look at the perfect quote. So you find a passage in a book or a journal article, and it says exactly what you want to convey in your paper. So how do you go about incorporating that into your paper? You must, well, first we'll say, what is the quote? The quote is taking exact words from the author. You are taking it word for word from the source. You must use quotation marks, and you must credit the source. Now, there's always an exception to the rule, and for APA and MLA, if you take a larger quote that is beyond a certain specification, for APA, it's 40 words or more. For MLA, it's 4 lines or more. If it's a really long quote, it has to be a block quote. And in that case, you will not use quotation marks. So I just want to call that out because on this slide, I'm telling you, you must use quotation marks, and those are for your shorter quotes. So if you come to the Writing Center and we're helping you with your paper and we see you have a longer quote, we'll call that out to you. We'll say, hey, this needs to be a block quote format. But every other quote will be in quotation marks, and you need to cite your source. Give credit to the source. So how do we incorporate the quote into your paper? What is the recipe for success? You have to embed the quote in your paper. You can't just slap it in there. You have to delicately interweave it with the words you've got going on in your paper. So you have to embed it. You have to introduce it. You have to put the quote in there, and then you have to explain it. So you really want to make sure that you are having a transition in what you're talking about to where the quote sits in your paper, and then to show how it fits into your paper. So you introduce it, you put in the quote, and then you explain it. So there's different ways to introduce it, and the ways you want to introduce it would be the sentence or part of the sentence preceding the quote, and that would be with a signal phrase. And there are different ways to create a signal phrase. In a couple slides, I have a word bank that you can look at for examples for the signal phrase. So you're going to start with a signal phrase, then you're going to use that quote, and then you're going to explain it. And when you explain it, you're going to need a transition word. And we'll have a slide for that, so you can see some of those transition words that you can use to lead into your explanation of why this quote is so relevant to what you're talking about. So let's see what that looks like for a quote. So this is an APA example. So if you are writing in the sciences here at AU, you most likely will be writing APA. So the quote that we have on the PowerPoint, it's color-coded. So if you see in blue, it's a signal phrase. And we have at the beginning of the sentence, the signal phrase is according to the author. Now, this is also a type of citation here, an in-text citation. So you won't use the word author. You'll actually plug in the author's name. And if there's no author and it's a website or a government organization, you'll plug in that information, whatever that source is, who's ever responsible, the creator of the content. So according to the author, according to your source. So you're going to plug in that. And for APA, you always have the year, the date in parentheses right next to the author name. So always keep those two together. They're like married. Keep them together. So that's your signal phrase. So you're not just putting your quote in the middle of your paragraph, you're introducing it with the signal phrase. You're saying, according to so-and-so, and then you'll have your quote. Or you might say, so-and-so explains, or so-and-so further declares, or, you have to introduce it. That's a signal phrase. So you've got your quote in your quotation marks, and you're going to finish up for APA. You're going to put a page number. You have to have a locator so that your reader can find that specific quote in your source. So you're giving them the author, you're giving them the year at the beginning, and you're going to end that quote in parentheses with the page number. Now, if you have an online source, you might not have a page number, you might have a paragraph number, you might have to count out paragraphs, or you might have to use a section title or section heading if there's no page numbers. So again, come to the Academic Support Center and we can help you figure that out. But you do need to have a locator with a direct quote if you're doing APA. And just from our quote sandwich, you have to finish it off. You have to explain it. And here we've used the transition word specifically. You could use significantly, specifically, and it goes on to explain. This demonstrates X and X. You fill in the blank of how this relates to your topic. Pertaining to your thesis or argument. So this is embedding the quote. This is what your quote should look like in your paper. This is an example of a direct quote, an APA, and you have the signal phrase, the quote, and an explanation. So always make sure that you embed the quote, that you work it in to your paper with the signal phrase and follow it with an explanation. Make sure you are owning the paragraph with your voice. Make sure that you are giving your input and not just throwing the quote in there and let them figure out, the reader, what that means. Okay, this is the signal phrase word bank I was telling you about. These are the active verbs. These are good examples of verbs that you can use in that signal phrase. So, so-and-so acknowledges, so-and-so demonstrates, so-and-so makes the case. Just like we have the signal phrase active verbs, we also have some examples of the transitions, the how and the why. So in the example, we used specifically, I think, and here are some other examples. In other words, generally, still, as a result, as a consequence. So these are all words that you can use to transition from your quote to your explanation of the why and how, why that quote is relevant or particular or significant to your discussion. You want to make sure you're relating it to your discussion so that you're owning the paragraph and you're sounding confident and you're really offering an explanation and weaving it together. So that's how you embed a direct quote. Okay, take a deep breath. It is time to paraphrase, which is the APA preference. Your instructors do not want an entire paper with quotes, words of other people. They want your words. So now we have to figure out how to do this. Okay, so what is a paraphrase? This is when you are going to restate the ideas of another author, but it must be in your own words. It must have a different sentence structure, and you must credit the source. So there's three things: your own words, different sentence structure, and crediting your source. So I'm sure a handful of you have already paraphrased, or you're learning how to do it if you're doing APA. And this is just a way to take other information from an outside source and bring it into your discussion in your own words. So let's take a look at how that's done. So this is an example of acceptable paraphrasing. And the top one is a quote. It has a parenthetical citation, which means the citation is in parentheses at the end. And the quote reads, for most of the last 500 years, imitation was the sincerest form of architectural flattery. So an acceptable paraphrase, you can look at our color coding so you can see how we change this into our own words. So I'll just read the quote. And this is an example of a narrative citation where the citation is actually in the sentence structure. So we see the source at the beginning, Arts Journal, 2005, further explains, that's a signal phrase, many architects do not consider copying an infringement. In fact, it's historically seen as a compliment. So the first thing I want to show you is in blue. In the quote, it says the last 500 years, and in the paraphrase, it says historically. So not only did they change the words, but also look at the position in the sentence. In the quote, that idea is at the beginning of the quote, and in the paraphrase, it's moved to the end of the quote. So you can, or the paraphrase. So you can see that not only did they change the words, but they also changed the sentence structure. They moved that idea to the end of the paraphrase. So just following along, in purple, imitation is reworded as copying. The idea of architectural is they refer to the architects, and then flattery is rephrased as a compliment. So this is acceptable paraphrasing. We've changed the words, we've changed the sentence structure, and we've cited the source by putting the source and year in the beginning of the sentence. So that is acceptable. What is unacceptable is patch writing, which is when you only change a few words, you replace them with synonyms, and you leave out a few words, and that's it. You really need to substantially change the structure of the text. You really need to rewrite the text and the idea. So make sure that you're thorough when you do the paraphrasing. I think the best idea for paraphrasing is when you're reading your actual quote, set it aside, and just see how you can write it in your own words without looking at it, and then compare to see if you've changed it significantly enough. And come see us, we'll help you. Okay, so paraphrasing is really important if you're going to be writing APA papers. And I just wanted to recap before we move on. It is the APA preferred method. You are to use your own voice and context, and you're going to be supporting your claim. So these are the reasons why we do it. And how we do it is using the other words, using a different sentence structure, and citing your source. So the difference between, or how do you know quotation or paraphrase, the difference between the two. How do you know which one to use? Again, you don't want your whole paper filled with quotes, but if you find the author has so precisely described what you want to state, that's a good time to use a quotation. It brings in another voice. It gives you a source to analyze. It gives you something to further discuss. So those are the reasons to use quotations over a paraphrase. Reasons to use paraphrase over quotation: you're going to clarify it, you're going to abbreviate it, and you're going to show what you know. You are going to demonstrate to your instructor that you understand the material, you understand the discussions going on around it, and you're able to put it together. So what happens when you don't quote or paraphrase properly? Well, just like you have resources for writing, Grammarly and EasyBib, instructors have resources for checking out, if things are anything is plagiarized. I'm sure you've had to turn things in through certain checkers when submitting electronically, and we're responsible for what we write. There is an academic integrity policy here at the university, and it is taken seriously. So you just want to make sure that you're, following the proper ways to cite your sources and to, turn in something that is well written and reputable and credible. Okay, so if you fail to quote or paraphrase properly, if you fail to cite your sources properly, and you fail to list your sources properly, then you will not uphold the academic integrity and you will be busted. So please follow along and let us help you. Come to the Academic Support Center. We love to work with our students. We love to just go through your sources and your paper and see how you might need help. Okay, so we know where to find the information, and we talked about how to incorporate the information into your paper. So I just wanted to review research paper basics. Whether you're doing APA or MLA, you're going to either have a title page or a heading. Typically, there is an introduction and a thesis, followed by body paragraphs and your conclusion. I wanted to mention it is most appropriate to put your outside sources into the body paragraphs. It's not completely unheard of to have it in the introduction and conclusion, but if you're wondering where to put your paraphrasing and quotes, it's typically in the body paragraphs. That's where you get into the discussion of your work, and that's where those sources should sit within your discussion. So if you're not sure how to start or where to put it, save your outside sources for the body paragraphs, which fall in between your introduction and conclusion. Okay, so this may be a review for some of you, but because this goes with how to incorporate the sources and how to give them credit properly, we're going to go over how to do the in-text citation and the source page at the end. And I'll just clarify, for the source page at the end, if you're doing APA, it's references. If you're doing MLA, it's works cited. And if you're doing Chicago Manual of Style, Turabian, it's bibliography. So that's why you see different names there. No matter what, you're going to have the in-text citation, no matter what style of writing you're doing. But as far as the sources at the end, it will be called something different depending on if you're MLA or APA. So again, you've got your sources, you're writing your paper, you've got either quotes or paraphrase, doesn't matter, quotes or paraphrases, they will all need in-text citation and they will all need sources at the end. Okay, so there's two ways to do the in-text citation, and we've talked about this a little bit when we were going over quotes and paraphrasing. And one is the parenthetical, and those are your in-text citations that are in the parentheses, and the other is the narrative in-text citations, and those are found in the sentences. So if I refer to one or the other, just think of parenthetical in the parentheses, narrative in the body of work, in the sentence. Okay, so for APA, for the parenthetical, that's the one in the parentheses, here's an example for APA. APA concentrates on the author and the year. They want to know who said it. Just typically the last name is included in this in-text citation, and they want to know the year. How recent is it? Typically, you want your research within the last 10 years. You want it to be relevant, recent. You want it to be current. So if you're doing a parenthetical citation in your paper, this is what it's going to look like for APA. The last name of the author, followed by a comma, space, and the year. The name that you put in this parenthetical citation is going to correspond with the first name on the source line on that resource page, the source page. So keep that in mind. Whatever you use in the parentheses needs to match up with what you have listed on your source page at the end. And I'm saying source page because you may be writing different APA, MLA. If it's APA, it'll be a references page. If it's MLA, it'll be a works cited page. Okay, so here's some examples of what the parenthetical citation looks like. And this is for direct quotes. This is, we're taking another author's work word for word. We're putting it in quotation marks. And I would like to show you, because there's different ways to do it depending on how many authors there are. If there's one author, it's simply the author last name, followed by a comma, followed by the year. And then if it's a direct quote, you need a page number on there. You need a locator. So P period for page number, PAR period for paragraph abbreviation. If it's an online source and there's no page numbers. And then let's look at the second example. That's if there's two authors. Notice if it's in the parentheses and there's two authors, you're going to use the ampersand. That's the and sign. And you follow the pattern of comma, year, comma. If it's a page range, you do lowercase pp and the page range. Now this is a little bit more tricky. If the source has more than 3 sources, this is a direct quote for more than 3 authors, you're going to use the first last name that appears, and then you're going to use the word et al. It's Latin for and others. ET space AL period, and then your comma. So for anything that's 3 authors or more for a single source, you use that et al. With the first author's name. And then you see the example of the abbreviation for paragraph. Okay. So now that was parenthetical, that was in the parentheses. Now we're going to talk about the narrative. This is the citation that is in the sentence. This is when you use the signal phrase. And the example here is according to Spartan, and then the parentheses with the year 2022 and a comma, and then you would go on to either paraphrase or direct quote. And again, anything that you have in your paper as far as your author, it needs to show up on your references page at the end. That's APA. So Spartan's got to show up on the references page if you're using that in your in-text citation. Okay, now for the narrative citation, these are examples, just like we did for the direct quote, and the parenthetical will now do the examples for the direct quote with the narrative. So this is in the sentence, and this is similar to when we were doing the quote sandwich. So we have Spartan 2022. Remember, for APA, the author and the date are always together. They're married. Always keep them together. Date's always in the parentheses. Sometimes the author jumps in the parentheses. Sometimes they don't. So for this quote or this paraphrase, that was a quote. Spartan 2022 declared that, and then you have your quote. You've got your page, the locator at the end. Now here's something a little different for APA for 2 authors. When it's in the sentence, when it's narrative, you write out the word and. If you remember when we were talking about the parenthetical for 2 authors, you use the ampersand. So think of it this way. If your citation is in the parentheses, it's in the symbols, use the symbol and. If it's in the sentence, write it out in the sentence. So for 2 authors for APA, they do it a little different for parenthetical and narrative. So we're looking at narrative now. It's written out A and D. If it was parenthetical, if everything was in the parentheses, it would be the ampersand. But that's a small detail, but if you have a source with two authors, that's what you need to do for APA. Okay, and then for three or more authors, again, we saw this with direct quotes, it's et al. You want to make sure you're using that. You don't list all of the authors, you just list the first last name that appears with your author list, followed by et al, and then 2020. And then you have, this is the rest of your signal phrase, exclaimed, followed by the comma, direct quote, pandemonium ensued, followed by your quotation marks, your page range, and your punctuation. Punctuation always follows the citation. The exception is that block quote that I talked to you about earlier, but don't worry, come and see us. We'll help you through it. Okay, for APA parenthetical citation for paraphrasing. Okay, we just did APA. We just did the in-text citations for the direct quotes. Now we're going to talk about it for paraphrasing. And we did look at this a little bit before when we were making the quote sandwich. So hopefully this will look familiar to you. So we're restating the words, we're offering a different sentence structure, and we're citing the source. So here we have many architects do not consider copying an infringement. In fact, it is seen as a compliment. So at the end of the paraphrase, in parentheses, we have the author or writer, followed by a comma, and then the year. If you are writing a whole paragraph that's coming from one entire source, you can, so that you don't oversight and you don't interrupt every sentence with a citation to interrupt the reader, you can, for a long paraphrase, cite the source initially at the very beginning of the paragraph, at the beginning of your paraphrase, and then each following sentence that is from that same source needs to be, you need to use language to indicate that you're still paraphrasing. For example, you would use, they further explain, the researchers also report, the data also show. So you want to demonstrate in your language that, hey, I'm still paraphrasing, and then you don't need to put that parenthetical citation after, because you've already cited them initially, and you don't want to do it on every single sentence if it's a whole paragraph, the same source. Okay, so that was parenthetical. This is narrative. This is when it is in the sentence. You see the date is right next to the author, writer 2005, reports historically, and then the paraphrase goes on. So this is the example of the narrative. Your citation sits in the sentence. The date is always by the author name. And here, because it's a paraphrase, you don't need a page number. For APA, you only need a page number if it's a direct quote, because the reader needs to be able to find where that information came from. Okay, so we're going to look at how to do the references or works cited page. This is after you've written your paper and you've cited your sources within your paper with the in-text citation that we just went over. You are now going to have a source page at the end. For APA, it's references. For MLA, it's works cited. And both APA and MLA both use a separate page format. They both have it paginated, which just means it has a page number on it. It's alphabetical. The entries are alphabetical by last name. If there's not a specific author, you would put creator, well, whoever the creator of the content is. So if it's an organization or a website, you would use that. The formatting is double spaced and hanging indent. So those are the things that are common in both APA and MLA for that last page of your paper where you're listing your sources. If you use a citation generator, it's fine to help you get started, but please double check it. Sometimes they're right, but sometimes it has a different font that what you've been writing in. That might have a different font size, different format. So you always want to make sure, always double check. Just because Google says it's true doesn't mean it's always true. So double check. And keep in mind, your reference page is a clear path from all of those sources in your paper for the reader to be able to find the source outside of the paper. So you want to make sure that anything that's listed in your paper that you've quoted or paraphrased has an entry on the source page, and that there's a clear path, whatever author name you used in your paper appears on the reference page. So for APA, this is what a reference might look like if you have, looks like a journal. So we have the last name followed by just the first initial. If you have a middle initial, put that on there too, followed by the date and period. I want to point out that the name is in sentence case. The title of the journal article is sentence case, which means you capitalize it like you would capitalize a sentence. The beginning word is capitalized and all the subsequent words are lowercase. There's two exceptions. If you have a proper noun or a word that follows a colon, that would be changed back to uppercase. So this is what a APA reference looks like. The journal is italicized, and then you have a volume. Looks like there's a volume or page range there. You always include a DOI or the URL if it is a digital source. Okay, for works cited, which is MLA, some of you might still, or if you're working in English or if you're working with the arts, humanities, you might still have MLA. And I just wanted to point out, this is going to look different. They, couple of the main differences is they do write out the first name. So it's writer, comma, guy, not G period. They do capitalize their titles and they put them in in quotation marks. So when architects copy, journal is still italicized. They put the year towards the end and they include the page number and the URL or DOI. So keep in mind, it is going to look different whether it's APA or MLA. Okay. Little breather, little recap as we wind down here. What we talked about today was where to find the material. You want to make sure you have credible sources, whether they're books, website, journal articles. You want to make sure they're credible sources, something that's suitable for academic work. We talked about how to incorporate the sources with both direct quotes and paraphrasing. Don't forget the direct quote, you are using word for word from another author with quotation marks and giving credit. And for paraphrasing, you are rephrasing someone else's work. You're putting it in your own words, you're changing the sentence structure, and you're giving credit. And no matter whether you do direct quotes or paraphrasing, you always want to make sure that you embed your quote, which means you set it up with a beautiful signal phrase, you nestle it in there in the writing you're already working, and then you explain it before you move on. You really want to make sure that quote is surrounded by your ideas, your work. Okay, and then in the latter half of our presentation, we went over the in-text citations, both the parenthetical and narrative. So that's how to incorporate your credits within the paper. So you're giving credit to the sources within. And then you are also, we also talked about how to list those sources at the end of the paper, either APA reference page or MLA works cited. So those are the 4 areas that we talked about tonight. And I want to thank you for being so patient as we worked through all of these details. Writing takes a lot of time. Give yourself time with drafts and revisions. We recommend you proofread out loud just so that you can have a chance to catch an autocorrect or a typo. And keep in mind, as you're winding down your semester, we have 30-minute appointments and 60-minute appointments. And even if we're booked up, put your name on the waiting list because we will add hours and opportunities to meet with you. So don't be discouraged if we're completely booked. It tends to get that way towards the end of the semester. So put your name down on the waiting list so that we know that we need to add more so that we can reach all of our students. So please keep that in mind as you're signing up for appointments.
So this question is for the aspect of plagiarism. If you fail only one of the tiers, is that plagiarism or is it still considered as something you can fix easily?
Well, it's still considered plagiarism. And you are able to revise it, you are able to fix it. As far as the academic integrity policy, They have tiers there. There are so many strikes. It depends too on if you're turning something in and it's a draft, it might not be as serious as if this is your final paper, and you'll have opportunities to revise it. Honest mistakes, those happen too. But even one out of the three would still be considered plagiarizing. Yes.
We did have one question come up. It is, can we start the intro paragraph with a quote from an outside source?
You totally can. It's not recommended, but you totally can. I think the answer to that question is if you find the most perfect quote that goes hand in hand with your paper, and you feel this is your attention grabber, this is the way you want to start your paper and build on that, then I think it's okay. They typically you typically see quotes and paraphrases in the body, but I wouldn't say, oh, absolutely not, don't do that, because there is value in it if you find one that is perfectly fitting, and if it's going to build your discussion. So yeah, that's going to be a judgment call. Sometimes you might want to do that as an attention grabber, and it just has to be something that is just so perfectly suiting to what you want to talk about.